Hi, in this video of Inkpot, we begin with Development Economics course, Semester 5. So, beginning with the first unit. Unit 1 is on Conceptions of Development. Well, this unit is divided into two chapters. Chapter 1 is on Macroeconomic History. Okay? And chapter 2 is on economic development. Well, chapter 2 has more of conceptual things, factors, and chapter 1 presents more of a context as such. Well, so in the beginning, as a prologue, as well as in the beginning of chapter 1, they tell you that why do we need to study development? Need to study development arises from a host of factors. Okay, the first one foremost being differences at the economic level, at the social level, at the geographical level. So this kind of differentiates nations, people across nations, and hence it is very important to study why the differences arise. To put forth, Chapter 1 on macroeconomic history gives you quite different cases telling that reasons can be, as we've just discussed, historical, geographical, scientific, and institutional. So historical would mean that countries differ on the path followed for the development. Okay. Geographical would mean barriers like land, water, the kind of topography in that particular nation might be contributing, might not be contributing to the economic growth. That makes the difference. Scientific would be about the ideas, technology, etc. And institutional is at the capacity level, like how is the growth process facilitated. In this portion, the author gives a reference about Eurasia. Example. Now, Eurasia was well developed by the rest of the world because of all of these four factors overall. Like it lies in the temperate zone, then there are no natural barriers, there are domesticated animals. So, the growth process as well as the development diversity was much better and advanced than the rest of the world. So, coming to the most common measuring parameter for growth development, it's the GDP or the gross domestic product. We can say it as the value of final goods and services being produced in a particular year. You should know the three criteria to arrive at GDP. Well, the authors do not discuss this in much detail, but briefly, there are three methods. You must be recalling this from your high school and previous semesters, isn't it? The first, output method. Well, output method gives you net value added at factor cost. It's also called the value added method. For an enterprise, deducting all the intermediate consumptions. Then the second is the income method. Income method calculates NDPFC. Now, NDPFC is from the factor payments angle. Remember, so it is about seeing the income from the distribution side. Final method is the expenditure method. Now, the expenditure method, as the name says, it sees from the expenditures incurred at the consumer level, expenditure at the government level. So remember that formula, Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus NX, net exports, and this measures GDP MP. So Y is nothing but GDP MP. Okay, so we take GDP in real terms while comparing with across nations, or even to factor out the effect of inflation prominently. Also remember that GDP is a flow concept. All of this is discussed in this particular chapter by the author, and these issues are such that you should be remembering yourself, isn't it? So So flow is GDP versus stock concept could be the example of wealth. Okay, so what are the drivers for economic growth? The first prominent driver is physical capital. Well, physical capital would include your tools, machinery, essentially which facilitate growth process is your physical capital. It enhances productivity, isn't it? So this could be one driver. Second could be human capital difference. Now the author presents that human capital has a dual role, or say dual perspective. Now when we see from the angle of education, or the other angle when we see from the angle of health. Okay, now an educated individual, educated human capital, and a well healthy educated healthy person, well, both of these would lead to cognitive skills being better, advanced, and hence the result is economic development, isn't it? Of course, the growth also. So this was one perspective. Then ideas. Ideas is another driver. Again, ideas would refer to your technology levels, scientific innovations, all of that, right? So countries differ on this parameter a lot depending on how advanced their technologies are, whether they're relying on traditional methods or they have something new. Fourth driver would be population. Now population has a direct connection, but before that we will see how can we subdivide population. First is the net reproduction parameter. Now net reproduction is the difference between birth rate and death rate. Okay. Net immigration. Now net immigration is the difference between people coming in the country, immigrants minus immigrants, people going out of the country. And the another factor which affects through population is the age distribution. Now age distribution, if you remember, you can have the distributed categories as less than 15 years, 15 to 64 years people, working age people, isn't it, the demographic dividend, and above 64, 65 years, the old age. So that affects. How does it affect? Well, population has a relation with the demand for capital, demand for goods, and demand for goods would have a relation with national income. Also, it affects through the standards of living approach, right? So it approaches how that if you have a higher population, then it may affect the standard of living also for the nation. Lastly, education. Again, education should not be seen just affecting income. It can also affect through lowering the fertility rate, lowering the infant mortality rate. How? By awareness, by literacy. So it has a very holistic effect, very holistic drive process for economic growth. Next. So apart from these factors, the above discussed factors, we also have TFP, which is total factor productivity, and institutions. Okay, first TFP. What is TFP? TFP is simply increase in efficiency. Increase in efficiency is TFP because it will not happen through the route of labor increase or capital increase. Let's take an example. Okay, so if your real GDP grows by 6%, okay, change in labor, change in capital contribute to 4%. Therefore, the 2% growth is coming from, now this is coming from your TFP. So we also say that rise in TFP is nothing but the long-term economy's technological change or technological dynamism. Basically, we can say the progress caused due to increase in efficiency. Now this increase in efficiency, the author gives various examples. You can also remember that, see, it can be in the form of ideas, institutions, all those factors which can raise efficiency. Like in UK's case was about ideas and technology, which led to high economic growth. Okay, But Africa was about local institutions, both within TFP. Okay, next comes institution. Now, what are institutions? Institution by definition are established law, custom, usage, organization. Well, they are also arrangements. So you need to remember broadly that don't assume that institution has to be a physical place. Okay, institution can also be your as simple concept as a practice, as simple concept as a usage, as a rule. That's it. Institutions, you should remember that the number doesn't matter, but what matters is the quality of institution, the system of checks and balances. So how much of checks and balances, which would mean that whether the institution is overdoing some research or overdoing its activity, or it's less doing and it's doing it fulfilling in a good way or not. These factors would need a check from some external monitoring authority maybe, or within their own institution. Finally, limits on wastage, and of course no corruption. So these factors matter more than the number of institutions, isn't it? Okay, next chapter is on economic development. Well, the foremost thing the author talks about is what is economic development. So you need to remember that it's a multifaceted concept. Okay, multifaceted means it cannot be said, or we say multitude of yardsticks. So it cannot be said that we see development only from the economic angle. No. Or even if we have economic development, this can have issues ranging as socio-economic, political, cultural, and even other. Okay, so the idea is that there can be various dimensions to the same economic development. It is not just caused by the income level or so assumed. Okay, also remember that it was Paul Streeton who gave economic development dimension as multi-dimensional. Sometimes they may ask you in the exam that who devised the concept of economic development to be as multi-dimensional, and this is quite straightforward, but you never know. So you should be knowing what are the historians, scholars, or academicians mentioned in the particular reading as well. Okay, next, and there are different indicators also. So like I said, so we should not assume income only to be the measure for measuring economic development. Society as such, the institutions, the cultural upliftment, background, infant mortality rate, fertility rate, all those issues, education can also measure economic development. Okay, the first and the foremost parameter usually seen for measuring economic development is income, more so the per capita income. Okay, there are two prominent methods the reading also discusses. The first method is exchange rate method. Very briefly, you need to know this. Exchange rate method essentially means when you have to see your domestic country's goods, services, or production in terms of the foreign currency. So basically you compare it from the price of foreign currency to price of domestic currency, convert it, and then see how does per capita income vary. Second would be purchasing parity method. Well, purchasing parity method they describe in a box in this chapter. It's the ratio of domestic expenditure incurred in the country divided by international price value of output. By value, I hope you remember it's always P into Q, right? So essentially the purchasing parity, the real value of domestic versus international valuation to come up at per capita income. Okay, next. So what are the debates and issues surrounding economic development measurement? Well, the first and the foremost is that as claimed gross national product Well, or the GDP, it's not the overall economic development measure only. Why? Because it is not able to account for negative externalities like pollution, then the displacement cost of people because of dams and railways. So it does not factor out the social costs, the private costs, right, and the environmental damage, all of that. So we cannot say the GDP or GNP is projecting the overall economic development. This is an issue as well as a debate. Okay. Then per capita income also has issues. Number one, underreporting of incomes. Well, this is same as your moral hazard issue, isn't it? You remember? So people might not be reporting their incomes well. Then what can we do? Then how do we measure the development? This is an issue. Second issue could be tax collection being inefficient. Well, this is a very difficult case, especially in countries like India, right? Because of corruption, tapeism, red tapeism, whatnot. Okay, next factor is non-marketed goods or public goods. Essentially those goods which are traded within the country only, they do not go outside. Their prices may not be reflected by exchange rate. Especially if we go by, say, the exchange rate method, how will it give us a clear picture, right? How do we assess economic development across nations? This is an issue. And the last could be distortion in market prices. See, basically you need to remember that price does not reflect the true marginal social costs incurred for any good or service. Okay, and for this, to remedify this problem, there have been research going on. One of the finding is also discussed in this reading about shadow prices. Okay, shadow prices give you the imputed value of input output, essentially to suggest that how much is the price after deducting all kinds of costs, social costs and all kinds of costs. But this is at a very research level going on right now. So yes, you need to remember these 4 points. Okay, next. So there is a definite need to be thinking beyond per capita income. PCY is the short form. Okay, there are several indexes, and author has discussed only 2 indexes. So we will cover only those 2 as the most important ones. First one, HDI. Okay, HDI was first published in 1990 by UNDP. Its formula looks like this: geometric mean of 3 parameters. Okay, the first parameter is life expectancy at birth. The second parameter is educational attainment in society. Well, this is nothing but the average of mean years of schooling index and expected years of schooling index. If we go more in detail, mean years of schooling index is nothing but mean years of school upon 15. That's your mean years of schooling index for a country. And expected years of schooling index is also nothing but EYS, or expected years of schooling upon 18. Well, you would not require this much of detail in terms of the formulas, but you just need to be aware of these 2. Okay, and the last parameter is your decent standard of living. This would be given by GNI per capita, gross national income per capita, simply. Okay, the next index which author discusses is your Morris physical quality of life. Now this was developed in 1979 only. The idea he communicates is that there is not one HDI index which developed, but there's so many, and even before HDI indexes developed. So this one is PQLI. Okay, PQLI is simply the average of 3 parameters: basic literacy rate, infant mortality rate, and life expectancy at the age of 1, giving equal weights to all these 3. You need to just simply remember the names, that's all. Okay, so last, the conclusion. There are 2 main conclusions in this chapter. First, in this entire unit, so the first conclusion is that per capita income, well, it's the most prominent way to measure economic development. It is not a bad indicator of human development, but then it is not the only parameter. Why? Because we can have several environmental factors, economic, social factors, political factors, and there are so many other indexes in those regards, right? A country may be doing well at the social level, it may not be doing at economic level. So these kind of factors make the development assessment a very broad way, not just to look at incomes. And lastly, for any two countries or more than two countries, differences in development arises because of income levels difference, income distribution difference, and socio-economic development factors. Your education, poverty, and crime, all such other social factors. Okay, so this is all about your unit 1 in development economics. Hope you liked the video. Thank you.